one of the breaking news items out of the day was sort of this, what they're calling a diplomatic miracle from Marco Rubio, who delivered a speech that has been widely praised, kind of bringing the room together at the Munich Security Conference, talking about the importance of a safe America and a safe Europe, and how Europe and America have to always be working together. Of course, that's one of the major reasons we even have something like the European Center for Law and Justice. I want you to hear from Marco Rubio, then I want to set up a call, because what everyone's saying is this is not only a great speech, which I think he did a phenomenal job. I watched it just a few minutes ago in its entirety, but also all the eyes are starting to turn to 2028 and who will be that Republican frontrunner, who'll be the Democrat frontrunner. I think we already know Gavin Newsom is probably right now considered to be the Democrat frontrunner, but the Republicans a bit up in the air. Let's hear from Marco Rubio, though, Bite 13.
For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. We do not seek to separate, but to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history. What we want is a reinvigorated alliance that recognizes that what has ailed our societies is not just a set of bad policies, but a malaise of hopelessness and complacency.
He went out there, made a very diplomatic speech, a speech that spoke to the hearts of the Europeans, probably spoke to the hearts of a lot of Americans. It was what you'd say is quote-unquote presidential in the traditional sense, maybe taking us back in time quite a bit. You know, there was last night was the NBA All-Star game. I know many of you probably tuned in, and many of you probably didn't. But you had Barack Obama, President Obama, on the front row. He's been making some headlines as well over the weekend with some of the podcast interviews he's been doing. He caught a ball that went rogue in the crowd, and it was a good moment, and it did kind of harken you back to years of old when maybe that was more of the tone of the President of the United States. And Marco Rubio kind of set a similar tone, a hopeful tone, a tone that looked to a future where we could be a little bit more united around the world. Not something that really, I mean, though he definitely represents the Trump administration, doesn't necessarily reflect always the tone of the Trump administration. And at the ACLJ, for the last 25 years, we have had, plus now, it's 26 years, 27 years, we've had the ECLJ, the European Center for Law and Justice, because we know that intrinsically we are linked together as Western civilizations, if you will, that have had a lot of the same issues over the decades and decades and decades of religious freedom. We've actually seen more push in the last 5 years towards this successful mission at the ECLJ. Now, of course, there's always going to be some step backs, especially in France. You never know where France is going to go. Sometimes they lean very conservative, sometimes they don't. But let's hear from Marco Rubio once again. As you start to think about what a 2028 looks like, I want to hear from you. It's a very stellar performance. I think he did a very good job. But even the words that we're talking about here, because I try to talk to you all the time about the European Center for Law and Justice. And I'll be honest that I can always look at the numbers and go, a lot of you do not seem to care or really connect with why it's important that we're there. I know why it's important. It has been a part of our story the entire time. Really, the entire ACLJ. None of it happens without European immigrants coming over to this country. We know how important that our role is in being connected with Europe. But we get a little lost sometimes on that. Marco Rubio seems to correct the course a bit. Let's hear Bite 7.
And so this is why we Americans may sometimes come off as a little direct and urgent in our counsel. This is why President Trump demands seriousness and reciprocity from our friends here in Europe. The reason why, my friends, is because we care deeply. We care deeply about your future and ours. And if at times we disagree, our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Because we know.
Getting a applause break in that crowd, not that common. It's something like the Munich Security Conference, where he's speaking about the sort of intrinsic nature of the connection between Europe, how our destiny is ultimately intertwined with yours. This was a excellent speech for those of us who also strive for a better Europe. And I found it to be very moving and very important. And a bit hopeful to where even the Republican Party can look in just a few years. I think that there was times when the President Trump's administration, we needed that course correction, where things were getting out of hand. But there are also times where maybe you have someone like Marco Rubio, again representing the Trump administration, who can pivot a bit more and bring the world a little bit back together. At the same time as Marco Rubio was delivering what I think is a landmark speech, again, really pushing and signifying why it's important for us to have a great relationship with Europe and why, the real big connections between Europe and America. And of course, whether that was in war or whether that's in culture, so many things we share and so many values we share. It's why the ECLJ exists, the European Center. On the other hand, you had other people there who are also eyeing that presidential run at some point. Of course, you had AOC there, who was asked a fairly simple question. Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move? Now, it's a big political question. It is not one that is, it's one you should have an answer to, but I understand you got to be careful with it. Because you're talking about China. But you know what? If you're going to want to run for president of the United States at some point, if you want to be on this global stage, if you are at the security conference, the Munich Security Conference, and you are at these big events, have some answers. Let's take a listen.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very longstanding policy of the United States, and I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point, and we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
Yeah, again, I think I read the transcript of that. I had not seen the clip. The transcript reads a lot clearer even than the performance that happened there. Again, when you're coming off of Marco Rubio having a very succinct, very great message, to then turn to the other leaders of a political party in the United States of America and to have this come up, it's really unfortunate that this is where we're at, heading into what could be a crazy 2028.
This was AOC's attempt to show that she's got foreign policy knowledge now that she's been in Congress multiple terms. And I think what we saw there is she's not ready for that on prime time. Absolutely not. She might be good about, getting protesters together and being the party of dissent, but that's a lot different than being the party of governing. And what she failed on was showing that she's not just a protester. It's not just a protest vote, that she actually knows what's going on in the world.
Yeah, on the global stage.